everybody, JC here from Toy News International, and today I wanted to put this video together because I want to try and take a few minutes and talk to you guys about Toys R Us, kind of take what's fact from fiction and just kind of break it down for you guys. I'm sure you've heard the rumors by now that things are not looking good for Toys R Us. Mass media has been picking up the story the last few days, and basically word came out the other day that leaked out that Toys R Us was looking to start liquidating their U.S. assets and essentially go out of business, and that we could see that happen as early as next week. So that's obviously caused a panic. That caused a panic in the stock market. Companies like Hasbro and Mattel already have started to feel the pinch in the stock market. Their stocks fell on Friday. I believe it was somewhere in the neighborhood of like 5 to 3% or something along those lines. But definitely, their stocks took a hit on Friday after the news broke that Toys R Us might be going out of business as early as next week. Now, how did we get to this point? So in order to understand how Toys R Us got to this point, I know a lot of people, oh, well, Amazon put another one out of business, and there is some truth to that, but that's not the whole story. And so in order to really understand how we got to this point, how Toys R Us got to this point, we got to go back to 2005, and basically that is when Toys R Us got bought out by Bain Capital and a few others, and they did a leveraged buyout of Toys R Us. And I'm not going to get too technical on what that means and everything, but essentially what ended up happening, the plan was to buy them out and basically get them turned around, basically have them go public and allow stockholders to get their money back and everything. But that things didn't work out that way. The IPO offering got canceled, and essentially Toys R Us got saddled with somewhere in the neighborhood of $5.2 billion in debt, and with interest payments that they had to start making every year in the neighborhood of $400 million. And so that in turn prevented them from basically, instead of being able to take money that they made from profits and putting it towards, continuing to grow the business, they were basically having to take all their profits and put it towards paying those interest payments. Not even the debt, but just the interest payments on those debt, on all that debt basically. Now, why did that happen? Why did the leverage buyout happen? Well, that we can basically thank Walmart, the likes of Walmart and Target and such. Basically, back in 2005, those places started to really kind of cut into Toys R Us and their toy sales and everything. Other factors like, just kids not buying toys as much in general played a part. All of those things that you hear regularly, had a factor in that. But what really, kind of killed Toys R Us was the leverage buyout itself, which ended up saddling them with all that debt, which in turn basically prevented them from ever really being able to be a profitable company and putting money towards building and growing the company from that point on. So that takes us to, the Chapter 11 bankruptcy in September, which is where they declared basically protection from their creditors so they could try and restructure. But then last Christmas, they had soft sales, which, Christmas is the biggest time of the year for toy companies and such. And so they did not have a very good Christmas this past year. So that resulted in them then taking steps to start closing stores. We got the announcement that they were going to be closing 200 stores. They put out a list of the stores that were closing here in the United States. And we're starting to see those stores close now. They've been having going out of business sales and everything. Then there were reports that on top of the 200 stores, they might be considering closing an additional 180 stores. Then we got the report that Toys R Us in the UK was declaring administration, which is essentially their version of bankruptcy, which would allow them to liquidate their assets in the UK. And then that brought us to this week where we got the news that looked like they were going to be liquidating their US assets as early as next week. Now, one thing I want to point out here is, and this causes some confusion, what happens here in the United States doesn't necessarily affect Toys R Us in other countries. So, as I mentioned, the UK Toys R Us's, the UK branch of Toys R Us did declare administration the other week, which was their version of bankruptcy. At that time, they said they were not closing any stores, but obviously they were laying the groundwork for that to happen, and I haven't heard anything about actual stores closing there yet since then, but you know, obviously that's something very likely, especially if the US ends up liquidating all their assets as early as next week. Now, one thing I want to note here is the Toys R Us in Canada, they issued a statement when the news broke about the US that business would be continuing there regardless of what happens here in the United States. They didn't have any comment on what was going to happen in the United States, but they did make it clear that business would be continuing as usual for the Canadian Toys R Us stores. So even if we do see Toys R Us go out of business here in the United States next week, looks like the Canadian stores, at least for a little bit, will continue on. So I just wanted to make sure that you note that. And I would assume that unless something is announced, even the UK stores will probably continue a little bit longer than what's going on here in the United States. But just keep in mind that what happens here in the United States doesn't necessarily mean the exact same thing happens with all the Toys R Us's around the world. Now, another thing I want to note, while Toys R Us officials have not been willing to comment on the whole liquidation thing, they did issue a statement on their social media on Twitter this weekend. And so I wanted to read it to you. And honestly, it sounds like just kind of damage control, but it doesn't really say much. But this is what they issued. To our loyal customers, we've seen an amazing outpouring of love and support in recent days, and we truly appreciate it. Our stores are open for business, ready to bring joy to children wherever we can and help new and expecting parents navigate raising a family. Also, I guess I should note that Babies R Us stores are part of Toys R Us, so basically they're all one thing here. So in the United States, if Toys R Us goes out of business, Baby S stores will be going out of business as well. That really probably doesn't affect most of us adult action figure collectors, but if you're a parent or what have you and you shop at Babies R Us, then you know, expect them to basically, you know, go out of business as well. Anyway, so that is where we are. So how is that going to affect us, the adult action figure collector? And the question I've been getting the most from you guys over the last few days is in regards to things like all the exclusives that were announced, specifically for most of you interested in the Marvel Legend ones. However, you know, and I don't have a definitive answer for this question, but I suspect, I highly suspect, I strongly suspect that most, if not all of those exclusives that have been announced for this year we'll end up seeing release. If Toys R Us does go out of business as soon as next week, then my guess is that companies like Hasbro with the Marvel Legends and even other companies that have Toys R Us exclusives will then take steps to find other avenues to release those. Basically, those products are far enough along that they're likely not going to just completely scrap them. So they'll find some other way to get them released. Could be online, could be another e-tailer, could be another retailer, could be an e-tailer. I don't know. There could be a delay, so something that maybe was out, going to be out in a month might get pushed back until, the end of the year or something. So there could be a delay with some of that stuff. And, maybe a small percentage will fall through the cracks and not get released, but I do suspect that between 90 and 95% of that stuff will end up all being released, if not 100%. So I wouldn't worry too much. Even something like the Vision Scarlet Witch 2-pack, which is the Marvel Legend Toys R Us exclusive that has actually started to hit shelves now, if Toys R Us actually closed their doors next week, I would suspect that Hasbro will get more of those out down the road through some other means, because obviously even though they're technically hitting shelves, many of us still probably would not be able to get it. Toys R Us, I'm waiting to see if Toys R Us actually fills their pre-orders. They put it up, that set up on their website last weekend. It quickly sold out. They say on their website that they should start shipping those out next week, Monday the 12th. And so I'm waiting to see if they actually do that. It's possible if things are really as bad as where indications are that, they maybe don't fulfill those orders. I hope that's not the case, but I wouldn't be totally surprised if that happened. But they are hitting shelves. They are starting to hit physical shelves. The Times Square, New York store got a whole bunch in just yesterday. And so, again, stores, the Canadian stores have been having them in stock for the last week or so. So, again, they are starting to see some release. But if Toys R Us actually were to go out of business next week, I suspect that Toys R Us or that Hasbro would then find a way to get even more of those out through other means if Toys R Us closes their doors. So in other words, what I'm saying here is, this could be a scalper's dream if Toys R Us goes out of business with those sets, thinking, oh my God, you didn't get one, you're not going to be able to now because Toys R Us has closed their doors. I wouldn't pay an arm and a leg from somebody trying to sell it on the secondary market. You might, if you want it soon, because there could be a delay. So if you want it soon, you might be willing to pay a little extra, but if somebody starts trying to charge you like $300 for a $40 2-pack, I would pass. That's my opinion, but obviously I can't say 100% with certainty that will get released in other means, but I would not panic if in fact Toys R Us closes their doors next week. Now, in the long run, what does Toys R Us closing its doors mean for the toy industry and us specifically? So for the toy industry, it basically means a loss, especially for this coming year. It means a loss of sales. Projections indicate that if Toys R Us were to close their doors completely in the United States, basically in the next week or so, that would cut into profit margins for large toy companies like Hasbro and Mattel in the neighborhood of somewhere between 10 and 15%. Smaller companies like Jakks Pacific would be somewhere in the neighborhood of 5%. Even companies like NECA Toys, which I don't have any hard numbers on, but knowing that NECA sells a lot of product at Toys R Us, I'm sure it definitely would have a negative impact on their overall profits for the year. That could possibly lead to cutbacks, layoffs. There are definitely negative repercussions that could affect the toy industry from all this. Unfortunately, I don't have my crystal ball to tell me exactly what's going to happen. But I do, for the most part, though, from us, like I said, there could be a delay with some exclusives that were originally going to be Toys R Us exclusives or what have you. But I do expect, for the most part, things will continue as usual. You'll just have one less retail outlet to go to buy your stuff at. But there'll still be Walmarts, there'll still be Targets, there'll still be GameStops and Walgreens and even JCPenney's that have been expanding their toy aisles. So places like that might see this as an opportunity to do even more, carry even more toys. So that could be a positive thing down the road. And then, obviously the e-tailers, the big bad toy stores, which is honestly where I would say you should try and support as much as you can, is those smaller e-tailers, because those are the guys that are really here to cater to us. The large companies don't always cater to them to allow them to cater to us. But, I always suggest that if you're an adult action figure collector, if you can, you should support those small toy retailers like the big bad toy stores and stuff, because they're the ones that are really here for us. And then obviously Amazon will be there as well. That's another big one. So I don't really, a lot of you, as many of you point out on the comment sections and the message boards and everything, you're never able to find anything at Toys R Us anyway because they don't stock worth a damn. So I don't think it's going to impact us that drastically as far as finding product overall. But again, definitely there will be negative repercussions that will affect the toy industry, and those could be felt for years to come. Now, is there anything that we can do to reverse any of this? So probably not. I think the damage is done. Even if Toys R Us doesn't go out of business next week, my personal opinion is that, Toys R Us's days are numbered. Initially, when it was first announced that they had declared Chapter 11 bankruptcy, I was giving them, in the neighborhood of 5 years. And then when they started closing all the stores, I kind of reduced that and was giving them 2 to 3 years. I was very surprised when I started seeing the headlines saying that they could shut their doors as early as next week. I was not expecting that to happen, and would still be a little surprised, if in fact that actually does happen. But in the long run, I think, the damage has been done. I don't think there's much that, can be done to save Toys R Us at this point. I think they're just too... things have just gone too against them that I see very little chance for an actual turnaround there. It is sad in some ways. I know many of you grew up on Toys R Us. Toys R Us, for me, I actually wasn't until I was older, because I grew up in an area where we had Children's Palace and smaller locally owned toy stores and even places like Kmart and stuff. But where I grew up as a kid, Toys R Us did not have a large presence. So I don't have quite that nostalgia that some of you seem to have growing up with Toys R Us and everything. I mean, obviously, you know, they've been around a long time and they're a staple in the industry. So don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that I'm happy that they're closing, but just personally, I don't have quite the nostalgia to Toys R Us that I've seen some of you have. But definitely it will be a sad day if or when they actually close their doors. And, you know, we'll have to wait and see if that's as soon as next week. All right, so let me know what you guys think in the comments section below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Also, you know, please like the video if you're so inclined, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already by hitting that subscribe button down below. Get real close to 40,000 subscribers, so would really appreciate your help. You can also follow me on my Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram accounts. We've been having discussions about this on Facebook and stuff, so, you know, please feel free to hit me up there. And until next time, guys, I'll catch you later.